Welcome. So glad you're here. I'm Abby Fenewald. I'm the events assistant here. And tonight, I'm so pleased to welcome Gabriel Sherman to discuss his new book, Loudest Voice in the Room, a chronicle of the life of Roger Ailes, all the way from his childhood in Ohio to his current reign over Fox News. This is actually the second night in a row that we've had a New York Magazine editor here to speak, and I think that his reporting expertise really does show through in how thorough this book is. Mr. Sherman's previous reporting has appeared not only in the New York Magazine, but also in the New York Times, the New Republic, and GQ, among plenty of other publications. And he currently serves as a fellow at the New America Foundation. The book is a truly fascinating take on Ailes' rise to prominence, and it captures everything from his work on Nixon's 1968 campaign, his supposed departure from politics during the 1988 campaign, and ultimately his partnership with Rupert Murdoch in the creation of Fox News. Sherman ultimately compares Ailes to the closest thing we have to a modern-day party boss, as candidates vie for his approval, and they recognize him as an integral part of their campaigns. So we're so lucky to have Mr. Sherman here with us tonight to tell us all about the book, so please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, and very nice introduction. Thank you to Politics and Prose for having me. I wanted to thank some people here tonight. My agent, Gail Ross, is here. My wife, Jennifer, one of my closest editors, is here, members of my extended family. So it's a real treat to be able to talk about the book after 3 years of reporting, which could be a relatively solitary experience. But, you know, I have been covering media for a decade now. I'm fascinated by how our media culture drives so much of our politics. I've covered the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, CBS News. I've been fascinated by how these big, large media organizations work. But there's no bigger story on this beat than Roger Ailes and Fox News. Fox News has twice the audience of CNN and MSNBC, its closest cable news competitors. It generates $1 billion of profit for Rupert Murdoch's media empire. It is truly both a phenomenon in terms of as a business and as a political force in our culture in terms of pushing our politics to the right, both domestic issues and foreign policy. But it's a story that everyone seems to have an opinion about Fox News. And I'm sure people in this room have strong opinions about Fox News on either side of what it is as a news organization. But we have very few facts about how it works and who Roger Ailes is. And so 3 years ago, I set out to write what I hoped would be the definitive history of this news network that is the phenomenon of its time in the media business. And very early on into that reporting, I realized that the way to tell the story, the only way to tell the story, is through the life and career of Roger Ailes, the founder and creator of Fox News, because the entire channel is an expression of his worldview. It is not a news organization where there are producers and editors who are choosing the stories and it's sort of bubbling up from the ground up. The entire news channel runs from the top down, out of his head, expressing his vision about the world. And so to tell that story, I wanted to understand who this man is. And what I learned is that Fox News is not, the reason why it's a phenomenon is not because Ailes came along at the right place at the right time, or Fox News has prettier female anchors who host. I mean, that's part of it. But but the reason why Fox News is successful is because it is the endpoint of a 4-decade journey, a dream that conservatives have had in America to completely realign the way our media culture works and to create a counter media universe, a media infrastructure of their own to balance what they saw as the pervasive liberal bias of the media. And by doing that, I learned that Fox News is not a news organization. It is a political project. It is the culmination of this work that many other people did before Ailes to create it. And he happened to be the visionary, the best, the most domineering, volatile, bombastic person, as I say in the book, who could achieve that dream. So I went on a journey to figure out, well, where did Roger Ailes come from? How did this man deliver on this dream that conservatives have had since Barry Goldwater and Richard Nixon and George H.W. Bush, and going down the line, any national Republican politician has wanted the media to speak for them. But how did Ailes achieve it? And what I learned is that he is a man of his time. Hopefully 50, 100 years from now, when people look back to understand, well, what was the later half of the 20th century like? Why did our politics become so divisive? Why did our news become a cage wrestling match for ideas? It's because Ailes did it. And he grew up, it's an amazing story, regardless of your politics. It's an American story. He has this incredible life that's something that's out of a movie. He came from very modest background in Warren, Ohio. It's a factory town outside of Youngstown. It's a very hard scrabble, down on its luck place. But at the time, he was born in 1940. And at the time, Warren, Ohio, like towns all across the industrial Midwest, were booming. It was a time when the kind of compact between labor and management, big factory industrial companies were booming, employing thousands of workers. Roger Ailes was one of those. He was a factory foreman. Roger Ailes' father was one of those. He was a factory foreman for the Packard automotive plant. And Ailes grew up at a time when, coming of age in post-war America, if you were a white Christian man, you were on top of the world. And it was that sort of mid-century view of the world that was imprinted on him. And he took that view of the world with him the rest of his career. But the things to know, one of the reasons why Fox News is such a phenomenon is that the experience he had growing up in that part of America gave him this will to dominate and achieve things that most of other people of his circumstances would never have gotten to. He was born a hemophiliac at a time when that medical condition was a severe disability. Severe hemophiliacs had a life expectancy of about 10 or 11 years old in his generation. His father was a brutal, volatile, domineering man. In the many interviews I had with Roger Ailes, his brother, about their childhood, they described episodes of sadistic physical abuse. His mother filed for divorce when Roger Ailes was in college, and the divorce record, is a portrait of a harrowing family experience. The mother alleged in her divorce papers that Roger Ailes' father threatened to kill her, that he was a paranoid, vindictive man, was alleged that she was having extramarital affairs, did not like that she worked outside the home. He was a very controlling man. And so these twin experiences of physical disability with his hemophilia and his father's physical abuse, I think imprinted on him this very dark view of the world that you see on the screen at Fox News. So really, my effort to report this book was to go on a journey to figure out, well, where does Fox News come from? What do we see on the screen? The talking heads, the hyper partisanship, the theater of it all. Well, where does it come from? So it comes from Ailes' background. So it comes from that experience in Warren, Ohio. It also comes from his experience in daytime television. His first job after graduating from Ohio University was as a young producer on the Mike Douglas Show. And as some folks might remember, who are in this room remember, it was the marquee daytime TV show of the 60s. It was the place where America went to sort of see who were the celebrities and the personalities of the age. But it was a very conservative show. And Ailes joined there in the early 1960s at a time when the culture was just about to split. And the Mike Douglas Show was firmly on the side of the establishment culture, the conservative culture. It was sort of trying to translate the counterculture for the conservative heartland audience, the millions of mainly housewives who tuned in every day. And it was on the set of the Mike Douglas Show that Ailes learned the techniques of daytime TV, of surprise, of drama, of the spectacle of television that he translated into the success of Fox News. The other thing he did on the Mike Douglas Show, in addition to learning all the technical skills that he would apply in television, was that he met Richard Nixon. And it was that encounter that paved the way for his entry into politics. It was one of these stories that will be kind of part of the myth of American politics, where two people have these chance encounters. And Richard Nixon, who was about to embark on his 1968 presidential campaign, stopped by the Mike Douglas Show to appear as a guest. And I want to tell this story because I think it tells so much of what you need to know about Ailes and so much of what you need to know about how he's built Fox News as a success. So first I'm going to tell Roger Ailes' version, and then I'm going to tell the version that I learned in the course of my reporting. So in Ailes' version, he is the 27-year-old executive producer of the Mike Douglas Show. He had risen from the ranks of a prop boy making $68 a week to running the show. I mean, one of these incredible, wonderkin stories where he takes over, becomes the young dynamo of the TV business. So he's 27 years old. He's running the Mike Douglas show, and he happens to meet Nixon. And as Ailes tells it, the day Nixon was set to appear, the show had also booked as a guest a belly dancer named Little Egypt. And Ailes, being the quick-thinking, young Turk that he was, did not want Nixon to have to bump into this exotic dancer in the green room. He was saying, okay, well, I'm going to stick Nixon in my office out in the executive wing where Nixon can have some private space and he won't have this awkward encounter. So Ailes sticks him in his office, and he happens to meet Nixon, and Nixon says, well, it's a shame a man like me has to use television to get elected. And Ailes snaps back, well, sir, if you think that way, you're going to lose again. And he's hearkening back to, obviously, the famous 1960 election when Nixon appeared ghost-like and sweaty on stage next to John F. Kennedy during the first televised debate. And so Ailes talks his way into a job. Nixon is so taken with this young producer, he says, I'm going to hire this guy. He's going to be my television advisor. And it's a wonderful story. It shows Ailes to be this lucky guy who just stumbles into success, doesn't really have that much ambition, kind of can speak truth to power, can impress Nixon, and that sent him on his way. And from that moment, he became the preeminent Republican political strategist of his time. He advised Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and then went on to start Fox News. Wonderful story. The fact is, it's most likely not true. In fact, it's a complete fiction. But it's a great story, and it shows the way he has been this myth maker, this larger-than-life storyteller. And so what I learned in the course of interviewing all of the old Mike Douglas producers, all the colleagues who worked with Ailes at the time, I consulted the show logs, actually the actual show logs of that day. It turns out there was no belly dancer on the show that day. She wasn't there. And it turns out that Ailes was keenly interested in meeting Richard Nixon. He told a colleague that he was going to be a media advisor. She suggested that he should become his TV guru. And he said, that's what I want to do. He told another colleague that he was taken by the propaganda films of Leni Riefenstahl, the Nazi propagandist, not for the ideology, but because she was so astute at using camera angles and lighting and the technical aspects to make propaganda. He was kind of a natural propagandist. And so he stuck Nixon in his office because he wanted to meet Nixon. He wanted to get into the political arena. And what I love about that story is that it shows how Ailes is spinning the truth. He's using the same basic facts to spin a completely different storyline, which is what you see on the screen at Fox News, that it's the myth-making, it's the storytelling, it's the narrative talents he has to make the news compelling to advance a conservative storyline. And that story really resonated with me, and it explains so much of what he would do later in his career. I just want to fast forward a little bit to Fox News to sort of explain one of the big revelations that I learned. So Fox News was started in 1996. It was failing and fledgling for the first 2 years of the network's existence. Rupert Murdoch, Ailes' boss at the News Corporation, pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into the channel. It was Murdoch's dream to dethrone CNN and to create a sort of a tabloid populist news channel. Murdoch's vision wasn't baldly right wing. That was Ailes' conception. Murdoch just wanted to create a business that would take down CNN. And so what I learned over the course of all this reporting, so Fox News started in 96. It really rose to prominence in 1998 during the Clinton Lewinsky scandal. And then during the Bush-Gore recount in 2000, and then in the months and years after September 11th is when it became a true phenomenon and a cultural force. And everyone asked me, when I was working on this book, is it real? I mean, that's the question everyone wants to know. Is Fox News real? Is it a cynical TV project? Is it kind of a money-making scheme to appeal to conservatives? But is it really real? Are the politics you see on the screen real? And what I learned after 3 years of reporting is that undeniably it is real. There's no joke. Ailes is a committed right-wing ideologue. He's a conservative. In many ways, his politics are more extreme than Glenn Beck's. Now, that said, he's willing to use cynical programming ploys like the war on Christmas to get his audience all agitated and energized. But Fox News exists to advance the personal political agenda of Roger Ailes, who is a right-wing conservative. Now, that was a big revelation to me because I've covered the media business. I know that the business is filled with, big personalities. It's one of the things that makes it so interesting as a reporter to cover. But what I learned is that Fox News is not really a business or a news organization. It is a political organization that happens to employ some journalists. And more than that, it is a cult of personality that is built up around this one person, Roger Ailes. The entire organization exists to please the boss, and they call him the boss. His title is president and chairman and CEO, but they call him the boss. His inner circle is in awe of him and terrified of him. I have never seen the exercise of power so explicitly in my journalism career as I have at Fox News. The level of fear and paranoia that exists in the hallways of the office and of the newsroom. One person close to Ailes told me that Roger Ailes is more Nixonian than Richard Nixon. And I don't know if that's possible, but I actually think Ailes does a good job of doing it. And that is such a important thing to understand about why Fox is so successful, because he rules that culture absolutely. The entire building moves in the direction that he wants them to. People think when they go to produce segments for the channel, they are thinking about producing news that will please Roger Ailes. And in fact, sometimes Fox News gets itself into trouble because producers will cross the line and they will produce things that will be over the line because they're overly eager to please the boss. But it's an example of how everyone moves to please this man. And that was a revelation to really get into this culture and to understand how unique and weird and kind of creepy, but also fascinating and inspiring it is. This man created really a phenomenon that has changed American life, but he's done it because he's created an institution that is a complete reflection of him. And so I just, one of the things going out and talking about the book that has been, that I've enjoyed doing is after doing all this reporting and really coming to understand what this company, what this news organization is that it is Roger Ailes. It is a reflection of him, and it is his creation. And so I hope readers, if they're interested in politics, they're interested in media and why we live in such a polarized age, he is one of the people you need to understand. And it is through his life and his unique life story that you can do that. And regardless of your politics, it's an American story. It's a rags to riches story. The arc and the narrative of his life is a compelling enough story that I have been gratified that readers who are not even if they're not media junkies have found it to be this human story. And so it's been great to talk to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone has lots of questions.
I have a comment and a question. Looking through your book, I'm extremely impressed with your attitude toward Ailes personally. There's no personal demonization, and you respect his talents despite what the use he's made of him. But the question I want to ask you, you said the politics are real at Fox, but I'm wondering how can that be true if they don't seem real to me? And my question is, how can they be true if everybody's motive is to please Roger Ailes rather than to express a political viewpoint?
That's a great question, and I can elaborate. Now, when I said the politics are real, I'm not saying that everyone who works there believes the politics that are on the screen. And in fact, many people who work there are either apolitical or outright liberal, which I actually find fascinating, why someone would subject themselves to that. But what I'm saying is that the politics that are on the screen are real and that they are serving his agenda. And his agenda is what you see on the screen. There are many people in the building. There are true believers. Sean Hannity is a true believing conservative. He's been a conservative talk radio host. He's been a conservative activist for most of his professional broadcasting career. So when I say it's real, it's not that you have to be a conservative to work there, but I'll tell you one story that I love in the book that gets at that. Ailes is deeply suspicious of people who don't share his politics. And he got a bee in his bonnet some years ago about Brown University. And he said to people in his inner circle, I've never known a conservative who has gone to Brown. And so he had his hand-picked human resources employee look through the Fox News employment files to find out if any Fox News employees went to Brown, and I don't think he found any. But I think the idea that he would go on a fishing expedition to just ferret out any Brown University graduates gives you a sense of his mistrust of people who don't share his politics. Also, he didn't like field hockey. Another time, he asked his HR person to look for any field hockey people who had on their resume.
Yeah, I was watching This Week, the news show This Week, a Sunday. This is like maybe 3 years ago. And Ariana Huffington was on, and so was Roger Ailes.
Mm-hmm. That's the last time he was on a network news show.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Anyway, she said to him, how can you call yourself a journalist? Words to this effect. How can you call yourself a journalist? What you're putting forth isn't true. And he said, I thought this was remarkable. He said, I'm not a journalist. I'm an entertainer, and I'm winning.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was the most incredible statement. I heard nothing about it. Now, I didn't maybe keep up on the news, but why wasn't that covered? This guy is admitting he's not after the truth. He's trying to just entertain people, and that's what it's all about. And nothing was made of that.
What a country, right?
How do you explain that?
It's amazing. I mean, I have had moments of clarity like that in the 3 years I was working on this book where I kind of snap out of it, and I'm like, wow, like this is happening. We have a the preeminent Republican strategist of his generation, a man who made attack ads for Mitch McConnell, George H.W. Bush, Al D'Amato. I mean, you go Phil Graham. I mean, you go down the line. This man worked for the entire Republican political establishment, running the most powerful and highest-rated news channel in America. I mean, what a country we live in that's happened. And I sometimes I have to snap my head to say, this is real, but this is the world we live in, and maybe my book will sort of focus people's attentions on that.
Yeah, but his statement kind of implies he didn't care about. I mean, he said he didn't care about the truth of it. What he cared about was that he was winning the ratings battle. So that almost makes him sound like he's, apolitical.
No,
it's all about success.
So I think you touched on a really interesting thing, which is that Ailes wants to win, and he needs to win to advance his agenda, to be able to program Fox as he sees fit. He can't do it unless he has the ratings and the profits, because the way Murdoch's media empire works is if you're delivering profits, Murdoch gives you a free rein to do as you choose. And so Ailes knows that without the numbers, without the ratings, he doesn't have the power. Right. So he's willing to use his entertainment techniques and his show business background from the Mike Douglas show to build an audience. But that is in service of his larger mission, which is to try to preserve the America he knew as a boy growing up in Warren, Ohio.
Yeah, I guess mine kind of two parts. To admit two questions. One is just the level of cooperation that you got from Fox News. You mentioned cooperation from Ailes' brother,
yeah.
And it sounded like you spent at least some time in the offices there talking to people. And was Roger Ailes kind of aware of your effort and so forth? And
well, I think the process is a great question, because it gives me a chance to talk a bit about the process, because I actually think the process of reporting this book is revealing of the subject. I'm not a character at all in the narrative of the book, because it's a work of reported history. But at the end of the book, I have a note on sources that explains how I reported it. And from the very beginning, more than 3 years ago, I reached out to Ailes and spoke with his public relations advisors and told them that I'm going to write this book. It's a big subject, and I would love his cooperation. And they said Ailes is not going to participate, and I said politely, well, that's okay, but I'm going to go out and do it, either way, and I would love to sit down. And over the 3 years, more than a dozen times, and in person and in writing, I reached out to get him to cooperate. And the response was no. And at one point, they tried to make a deal with me. His PR advisor said, if you agree to not quote anyone that Ailes could consider giving him a negative quote on background, if you agreed that every quote has to be on the record by name, then we'll consider talking to you. And I was like, well, first of all, there's no way as a reporter that I could agree to such terms. But secondly, that was so revealing. Because by trying to make me agree that I have to quote any source that Ailes could have an issue with by name, he is an incredibly vindictive, domineering man. He has a history of retribution against people that cross him. He was putting my sources in jeopardy, so I couldn't do that because I had to protect their confidences. Secondly, he went out after I was at work on the book for more than a year and teamed up with Rush Limbaugh's handpicked biographer to write essentially a hagiography, its own kind of sanitized version of his life and his career. And so this entire time, the kind of combative relationship I had with Fox was revealing that Ailes prizes one thing, and that's control. And he has propelled all of those Republicans to power throughout his political strategist career by controlling their image and being their image doctor and controlling the way the public gets to see them through television. And now he does it through controlling the news at Fox. But the story he wanted to control most was his own. So a reporter like me who wanted to go out and talk to everyone and paint a kind of complicated, nuanced, measured picture of who he is and what his career has been was a direct threat to that desire for control.
Okay. I'll skip the second one. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is interesting because there was someone here who spoke about Rupert Murdoch's empire, which is a similar story to yours, where his father was, sort of downtrodden, not treated well as a reporter and whatever. He just saw himself as an outsider. He was in a war to win this thing against liberals because he really believes it. And he was vicious, and if anyone said something bad about Fox News or anything like that, they would literally plant people on blogs and make up stories about people and ruin their lives and their careers. So my question is how much of this it was Rupert Murdoch versus Ailes?
So the way Murdoch's empire works is that Murdoch provides the capital and the kind of framework to allow people like Roger Ailes to exist. What's interesting is that Murdoch controls newspapers all over the world, and he's very involved in his newspapers. He's a newspaper man at heart. He actually edits stories. He suggests stories. He tells his editors what they should and shouldn't be doing. With television, he doesn't have the skills and the knowledge to really know how to run a TV channel. And in fact, Murdoch failed miserably for years trying to start a cable news channel, a TV news service to take on CNN. And it wasn't until he hired Ailes that he found someone to do it. So the way Fox News works is that it's essentially a company within a company. Ailes has complete freedom to do what he wants. And in fact, a lot of the things that you were talking about are singular Ailes creations. Ailes runs Fox News as a political operation. They have a mercenary public relations department that attacks rivals, attacks their own employees. I mean, they're famous for, if you cross Fox News, the PR department will leak things about their own employees to blogs to embarrass them in public to keep them in line. And that goes to the fear I was talking about, the way Ailes is able to keep people in line because they're worried that they'll wake up and read something nasty about them in a newspaper or on a blog. One thing that I was shocked to learn in my book, and this goes to the person's question about, aren't people sort of shocked at some of the things that Ailes does, is he personally helped create an anonymous blog that was called The Cable Game. And it was an TV industry, kind of real insider kind of blog that was read mainly by TV people. And Ailes essentially ghost wrote this blog. He had a person on his payroll, a Fox News contributor named James Pinkerton, who was a former Republican operative. He worked on George H.W. Bush's campaign with Ailes. And Pinkerton and others would write this blog, and Ailes would help dictate things. And if you think about that for a minute, let's just do a thought experiment. Imagine if the editor of the Washington Post was caught ghostwriting a blog attacking the New York Times as, unethical or dubious. I mean, that would be a national journalism scandal. The newsroom of the Washington Post, I imagine, would be in revolt. And most likely the editor would have to resign in disgrace. And yet at Fox News, Ailes can essentially run a dirty tricks operation against CNN and MSNBC and other TV people. And it's okay. And no one cares. And that's fine. We're a big country. But I was shocked that, when you see that he has imported the tactics of brass knuckles politics to the news business, that's one of the reasons why Fox is so successful, because Roger Ailes just plays by different rules, and he doesn't play by the sort of standards and conduct that most journalists abide by.
Yeah, two questions. One is, no matter how much Mr. Ailes wants to keep the America of Warren, Ohio, it's slipping away from him. And then, of course, the way you point out is cult of personality. One thing with the cult of personality, eventually, there is no personality. He will die. So could you kind of put on what do you see as the future of Fox? I mean, that's not what you wrote about.
No, well, I
But
did. I
spending
talk about that.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
but for 3 years, after Roger Ailes, what happens?
It's a great question, and I explore it at the end of the book. I asked many of my interview subjects that very question, and the answer is that no one knows, because the entire institution is built in his image, and one person very close to Ailes told me that they envision almost a Lord of the Flies like situation when he leaves, because he's kept the tier of executives, the producers beneath him, down, and they all fight.
Right.
He actually talks about this. He said in a meeting, he talked about what he learned from Richard Nixon, and he says, one of the things Nixon did is that he kept all of his advisors fighting for his loyalty. Haldeman and Ehrlichman and Kissinger. I mean, everyone, they were all spying on each other. I mean, it's the most kind of cutthroat, paranoid culture that Nixon created. Well, so Ailes kind of built Fox with a similar mindset. So all of the rival executives at Fox News are all fiercely competitive, and they try to prove their loyalty to the king. But if you take the king out of the picture, all the princes will turn on each other, if you think of it in sort of feudal terms. So I think that said, I think one thing that will happen is Fox can never exist in its present form without him. It's still a successful business. Their cable contracts with all of the cable systems around America that put it in homes are very secure, and their audience is still huge. But I don't think it can be the same creative force without him, because he is the charismatic leader. And so I think it's just a big question mark.
And the other one, since you're such good friends with Stephen Colbert now, does he really, really like Papa Bear Riley that much?
I think Colbert has in a certain way, has a lot to thank for, because he's made an entire comedy career out of them. So,
Thank you.
Was it your choice not to have any photographs inside the book? And I was curious, were you approving of the back cover photograph compilation here?
Well, my publisher, Random House, did an amazing job publishing the book. We did it on an incredibly tight time schedule. And in terms of photographs, I felt I wanted to put all of my energy into the narrative, into the writing and the storytelling and the reporting. I actually have on my website, I have a really interesting companion site that we built that goes with the books, that I hired an artist who did illustrations of all the main characters. So if you go to www.theloudestvoiceintheroom.com, you can actually have interactive content that goes with the book. But the book itself, I want it to be about the narrative and the storytelling.
And this photograph,
That was my publisher, Random House. They have
didn't have any say in that, or
other than that, I liked it. I mean,
Yeah,
they have a great art department. Yes.
Yeah, I'll do my second
Okay,
one now.
sure.
You
Part two.
Early on, you alluded to the close relationship between Ailes, Fox News, and the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
Could you fill that out a little bit in your
Sure.
viewpoint? What are the connections? Who, just fill out the connection there as you know it.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting relationship that has evolved through time, and it's changed as Ailes has amassed power and Fox has become more powerful. Really through the 2000s, through much of the George W. Bush presidency, Fox and the Republican Party were mainly in lockstep. Ailes had very close relationships with Dick Cheney and Mary Matalin in the George W. Bush White House. He would also talk to Karl Rove. There's a great scene in the book where Ailes would call Rove and essentially demand that the Bush White House put more people on Fox News, that they weren't getting enough guests. And what I found so revealing is that Rove was intimidated by Ailes. Most people out in America think Rove is the grand poobah of Republican politics. But in fact, the men who worked with both Ailes and Rove, the Bush officials I interviewed, said that Rove was actually scared of Ailes, that Ailes was of the earlier generation of Republican political strategists. He was the kind of the big fish in Republican politics. So Rove would essentially try to please Ailes. But what's interesting is that over time, especially in the age of Obama, Ailes has surpassed the Republican Party. The relationship with the party is such that Ailes programs Fox and does what he wants, and is not taking his cues from what Reince Priebus or any of the sort of Republican establishment is doing. In fact, after the 2012 election, Ailes told his inner circle that he blamed Romney's defeat on the Republican Party, and he joked that the GOP couldn't organize a one-car funeral. So he sort of thinks the GOP is hapless at this point, and he sets the message for where he thinks the party should be. And I argue that actually Fox has been detrimental to the electoral fortunes of the Republican Party, because as Ailes has amassed power and Fox News has become the brand of Republican politics, it has turned off a lot of more moderate and centrist voters. And so while it's made Ailes a very rich man and Fox a very successful business, in a certain way it's ended up harming the very party that he's dedicated his life to working with. Over here.
Given the paranoia, his paranoia, and the control that he has over the staff at Fox News, why do you think people were willing to talk to you and to tell you the story that they did about what it was like to work there?
Well, I think one of the reasons that this book took 3 years is that it was the most challenging reporting assignment of my career. Many people did not want to talk to me, and it required just the most intense form of persistence. Just sticking around is an underrated strategy. But I had to work on people for months, in some case years, to finally get them to open up. One of the main reasons, as a reporter, I have to know that sources are motivated by many things, and it's my job to know when someone has a personal agenda, when someone is spinning me, when someone's telling the truth. And one of the things I was most impressed by is the number of sources who spoke to me at length and candidly because they felt that working for Ailes, they had a front row seat to history, that they were ready, that this is a time in his life, he's turning 74 in May. Who knows how long Fox News is going to continue to have this run. And they got to work for a man who's the closest thing we have to a Citizen Kane-like figure. And this was the first attempt to have a real book that wasn't from any kind of partisan position. It wasn't approaching it through the lens of politics. It was approaching the story through the lens of journalism. That they were almost happy that someone wanted to try to get the story right. And so I was surprised that so many sources in the inner circle did come forward. And many of those people did speak to me on background, on a not for attribution basis. But I feel like even though they were scared and terrified of their boss, they wanted the world to know what impact he has had on our country.
Thanks.
You've been discussing Fox Views a lot. I don't call it news, but how compartmentalized is Fox? Does Ailes have any impact at all on the rest of the television empire or anything else that's part of that? Or is it purely
You mean in
Fox
terms
Views?
of the broadcast, Fox 5? Or,
right.
Yeah.
Is there any emphasis? Is
Well,
there
so-
any spillover into other shows?
So the answer is yes. So Ailes, in his role working for Murdoch, he controls Fox News, the cable channel. He is also in charge of the Fox Television Stations Group, which, not to get too technical, but it's the group of local-owned affiliates in cities all across America that Murdoch owns. And at times, over the 17-plus years that Ailes has worked for Murdoch, he has tried to expand his power base beyond just the Fox News and Fox empire. There was some talk in the middle of the last decade that Ailes wanted to get control of FX and some of the other entertainment assets that Murdoch controls. And that's an interesting portrait of Ailes' own ambition and how he's flexed his muscles. And he has had power struggles through the years working for Murdoch. But really, at this point, Murdoch has decided that Ailes' place in the media empire is running Fox News. That's what he's best at. And that's what really Murdoch wants him to do. So beyond the local affiliates and Fox News, Ailes does not have his hands really in other parts of the business.
So, bringing up the rear, I'm asking follow-ups to what a couple
Sure.
of questions. One is there demonstrable data to show that Fox has brought more of the conservative audience up front beyond Republicans?
Well, so that's a great question, and I did some of that research and reporting with the book. I mean, my book is a narrative; it's a story. So I don't go too deep on some of the statistical research that's been done on Fox's impact. There have been actually some really interesting studies. Some economists, one at the University of California, Berkeley, did some research. There's one study I came across that's fascinating that attempted to quantify Fox's impact on voting patterns. And the way they did this, the researchers had a great control. Fox News did not just enter into American homes all across the country. It was spread through cable systems in different cities, as different cities and municipalities signed it up. So you could see what was the voting pattern pre-Fox News, what would be the voting patterns after Fox entered a community. And the researchers, the economists who did the study, found a statistically material difference between voting patterns. Essentially, Fox News made conservatives more conservative and actually had an influence of making moderate Democrats into Republicans. It flipped party affiliation. And so that's an example of how Ailes understands how to program political messages to actually change people's minds. Now, that said, I think we're now at a point where Fox News is such a mature business that the audience is the audience. It's a very stable audience. It's a huge audience, but it's continuing to get older. It's a very conservative. It's a white. It's an older middle-class audience. I don't think Fox is now changing people's minds. But from the period of about 2000 to 2008, it had a material difference. And in fact, one economist argued that Fox News may have had enough of an influence to help tip the Florida vote tallies, which, as we know, was the difference of some 500 votes in Florida. So there has been some interesting research, and if you stick around after, I can point you to where I found it.
Just a quick follow-up. You say that Ailes tried to spread his wings. Murdoch sort of clipped him a bit. But might there be any sort of danger to Murdoch that something could happen to him like News of the World from the Fox ambition?
That was a question that many people asked me, and in the 3 years of reporting, I found no evidence that any of that phone hacking stuff took place here in the States. And two things are interesting about that.
Heavy-handed.
Here's the thing that's so interesting is that Fox News doesn't need to hack people's phones. And in fact, the Fox News model, the model Ailes created is actually to have relatively little original reporting. It's not like they're tabloid muckrakers and they're going out hacking Barack Obama's phone, because they don't need to, because they understand that their audience will be just as entertained and just as hooked if they do 25 segments about Benghazi and they never have to get to the bottom of it. You actually never have to answer the question. You can just do a segment, well, what do we know? What really happened in Benghazi? And just by asking the question gets what you want. You actually don't need to pay the journalists to go digging in the dumpsters to find out what Michelle Obama had for dinner. So I feel like the culture Ailes built is not that tabloid Fleet Street culture that exists in London. It's just a very different culture. And in fact, one more point I'll make is that Ailes has said in meetings that he believes Obama is a socialist. But he's told his producers it's a more powerful message if you ask it as a question. So if you go on camera and you say Barack Obama is a socialist, you actually will get a stronger response if you raise it in a question. So Fox does this. If you notice at the bottom of the screen, they're called chyrons. It's the banner at the bottom of the screen. And the graphics will often ask questions. Is Obama a socialist? Or does Obama hate capitalism? ? And just by raising that question, it's almost a form of push polling. You're planting that idea in the audience's mind. So by never even answering the question, you've already achieved your goal.
Do we have time for just one?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
sweet.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
That's cool that you mentioned the. I think they raised that technique in Outfoxed, if I'm not mistaken. So one thing I've kind of asked is how has Fox News really changed in the era of Obama compared to what it was in terms of the Bush administration?
Yeah.
Not just in terms of an overall, obviously, it's more reflexively attackive versus, defensive, but kind of has there been any substantive programming? And
yes, a dramatic change, and that's a great question because it gets at one of the big thematic shifts in my book. I tell the story as a story of acts. There's 5 acts in the book. The final act, Act 5, really is a portrait of Fox in the late Ailes era, as I like to call it. In the earlier years of Fox, from '96 till about 2006, while Fox was conservative, Ailes actually had some very talented and strong-willed news people around him who would challenge his right-wing instincts. And I think of people like Britt Hume, who hosted the 6 p.m. news hour, John Moody, a former Time magazine journalist who was his news chief, a man named David Rhodes, who's now the president of CBS News, and others. And these guys would push back and kind of try to moderate Ailes's ideology and his instincts. But through a variety of circumstances, those people ended up leaving Fox or moving into different positions. So in the Obama era, there were really no checks and balances on Ailes's worldview, and the channel became essentially more of a pure expression of him. And I like to think of Fox since 2008 as kind of the clearest picture of who Roger Ailes is as a political strategist and as a television producer. So in the earlier years, you had other influences, but now the difference between the Bush era and the Obama era is that it's just more of a purely Ailes creation.
When you read that biography of Murdoch, where the speaker spoke here, it became clear in that book over time that Ailes was never going to get a piece of world news, that the Murdoch family was going to continue to control that completely. He's so fixed on his father's, what he feels is his father's troubles that his father had when he was a broadcaster, that he's going to keep control of news world completely for his kids, and there's no room for Ailes at all. Talk about Ailes' effort, though, to get David Petraeus the Republican nomination.
It's one of those other examples where you kind of scratch your head and you can't imagine why this wouldn't be a bigger story. So the 2012 election was an election where Ailes declared to his inner circle that he wanted to elect the next president. Just to the last question, one of the main differences between the Bush era and the Obama era is that Ailes set his mission to defeat Obama after the 2008 election. And 2012 was going to be the year he would do it. And so Ailes went out, in addition to using Fox as a megaphone to attack the Obama administration, he went out to try to draft candidates that he felt would be worthy challengers. He went out and twice tried to recruit New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who, before the Bridgegate scandal, was one of the biggest rising stars in Republican politics. And he also, as you point out, went to recruit General David Petraeus. Ailes sent an emissary. He sent a Fox News contributor, a woman who is on his payroll. She talks about national security. Her name is K.T. McFarland. She was kind of a middle-ranking national security official in the Reagan White House. Had worked for Henry Kissinger and others. So he sent her to Kabul, Afghanistan, to make a personal appeal to General David Petraeus to try to draft him to run. And Ailes literally said if Petraeus ran, he would quit Fox News to run Petraeus' campaign as his media advisor. And now, again, do the thought experiment. Imagine if Jill Abramson, the executive editor of the New York Times, was sending Thomas Friedman to Chappaqua, New York, to draft Hillary Clinton to run for president. I mean, and then say that we're going to use, and she said we're going to use the news pages of the New York Times to make Hillary Clinton the next president. I mean, again, national scandal. She would resign in disgrace, and it would be, on the front page of every major newspaper. But again, Roger Ailes has demonstrated ability to play by a completely different set of rules, and to essentially walk away from any controversy that would derail any other person. And it's interesting to point out that the Petraeus episode was reported by Bob Woodward in the Washington Post. He actually obtained an audio recording. You can go home tonight, go on the Washington Post website and listen to the meeting between K.T. McFarland and General David Petraeus about her lobbying him to run. And yet it just kind of blew over. And so that to me is, it's what makes this book such a fun read, because you're reading these pages and what Ailes is doing. You're like, I can't believe this is not, taking him down. And yet he is such a savvy operator, and he is just such a skill about navigating out of these pickles that he's like a cat. He has 9 lives, and it's a great journey and a ride. Well,
yeah,
okay.
I see. In '96, you quoted Ailes commenting on the Easter Time and Newsweek covers that would. Ailes said, "Oh, it was always a story that beats up Jesus."
Mm-hmm.
They call him a cult figure of his time, some kind of crazy fool, and it's as if they go out and try to find evidence to trash him.
Yeah.
And then I see later you talked about during the Bush years, you were identifying those as an unmistakable undercurrent of Christian
Messianism. Yes.
Messianism, yeah, or whatever, yeah. I was curious, what are you identifying as Christian Messianism, and what kind of Christian do you see Ailes as? I mean, what did you find out about his Christianity?
Well, the reference to the Bush years was really trying to describe. I watched all the coverage after 9/11. I went back and I watched the old clips and tapes, and it's unmistakable on 9/11 and in the days after, watching Fox News. You see an undercurrent of having a clash of civilizations. Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, was one of the first guests on Fox News after 9/11, talking about the long war ahead and how we have to take the fight to the Middle East. I mean, you see this kind of religiosity that sort of underpins how they talk about the news, about the East versus West, Muslims versus Christians, that kind of programming. But to your point about what kind of Christian Ailes is, he is not, in his personal affairs, a real culture warrior. I mean, he's been married 3 times. He swears like a sailor. He doesn't live his personal life as you would imagine someone who fashions this network as the defender of Christian values in America. But he is an American traditionalist, and he does believe that the Judeo-Christian history of our country should be the dominant culture, that we should, prayer in school, Christmas as the war on Christmas, the skepticism about Muslims building mosques in America. I mean, that I think of him more as a cultural Christian than an actual religious Christian. He attends a Catholic church. He's not. He hasn't converted to Catholicism. His wife is a devout Catholic. But I think it's more about cultural traditions.
Was he brought up in a church?
Yes, he was brought up in a Presbyterian and an evangelical Christian home. His maternal grandparents were very religious. So he comes out of that mid-century American Protestant tradition. And I think he's trying to uphold those kind of values rather than actually, living his life that way. Oh, one more? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can you address the Tea Party and whether you think that Fox News and Roger Ailes in particular, and those questions at the bottom of
Yeah.
the screen that you mentioned, how much do you see Fox News and perhaps the personality of Ailes as precipitating what began to appear as very angry Tea Party representatives around the country at the time that they did?
Well, so that's a great question. And I interviewed Sal Russo, who's a political organizer in California, conservative, who runs one of the largest Tea Party groups in America. And he told me unequivocally that the Tea Party could not have existed without Fox News. Really, in 2009, by putting personalities on TV like Glenn Beck, Sarah Palin, and others, Ailes created the political context for this Tea Party movement to explode. Now, it's interesting to point out and important to point out that Ailes has a complicated relationship with the Tea Party because while he is a right-wing conservative and has very extreme personal political views, he also is a lifelong Republican strategist who has worked for moderate candidates. The 2 candidates we spoke about, Chris Christie and David portray us are essentially moderate centrist Republicans. So Ailes is smart enough as a political strategist to know that you need the populist anger to fuel the base, but you then need to pair that anger with an electable centrist candidate. And so as the Tea Party movement grew and grew, and Republicans were nominating candidates like Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, Sharon Engel, and others, these kind of extreme populist candidates, Ailes knew that these were not electable people. And so he had a complicated relationship, and at times Fox would limit the Tea Party exposure. And in fact, producers told me how Ailes would say, we need to dial back the coverage of the Tea Party because they're getting too powerful. And he was hearing from voices inside the Republican Party like Karl Rove, who said, essentially, you're going to destroy us if this is the face of the Republican Party. So you see the tension between his own personal politics, which I would say is much more in line with Tea Party politics, but his savviness as an operator to know that you need to modulate so that you appeal to a broad enough audience. And so, but to your question, no, the Tea Party I don't think could have existed without the wind that Fox put at its back.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.